Avengers Infinity War was actually a really good film. It's one of the few films where you actually see a villain who's a worthwhile villain who, for whatever reason, has done what he does and doesn't actually get beaten by the end of the film. A lot of these newer movies like to kill off their villains for whatever reason. And they are determined that good is always going to triumph over evil. But in Infinity War, evil triumphs over good. So now, naturally, the writers in Hollywood have to rush to figure out how they're going to make it so that everything that the evildoer did gets unturned. And basically, they have to reset everything back to zero. So I watched Endgame last night, and I felt partially that the film was a little bit more cartoony and lighthearted than the first film, Infinity War. And parts of it I felt were a little poorly structured. And in being poorly structured, I followed the film. I followed it right up until the end, and I thought that there were a couple of things that made no sense, specifically regarding the main plot. So I just wanted to submit some of the things that were bothering me while I was sleeping because it kept repeating on me. And I wanted to just talk about those things, which I think there's already a couple of videos talking about things that make no sense in Endgame regarding the plot continuity. But I just wanted to talk about just a couple of things that I felt made no sense in this film. Obviously, we can't use video because the makers of the movie will come right after us and they'll demonetize our YouTube videos, which is something I don't want. So I'll just use a couple of still photos. The way I thought this movie was going to play out was I expected that obviously the Avengers were going to do their best to get the Infinity Gauntlet away from Thanos, and somebody was going to do a reverse snap in order to make it so that all of the people who were eliminated by the snap in the first film would come back. So what I assumed was that they were going to play this movie straight forward in time, and that everything would progress linearly. Like, I really thought that what they were going to do was they were going to use Captain Marvel and Captain America and Hulk and all that. I thought that any of those characters, like especially Thor, who weren't able to stop Thanos in the first film, I thought they were going to come back and redeem themselves in the second film. But I thought that everything was going to be played forward. That was subverted because what they did was they decided that from the Ant-Man second film, what they did was they claimed that, okay, Ant-Man's coming back out of the quantum realm, and when he comes back out of the quantum realm, he runs up and tells the Avengers, okay, I was in the quantum realm, and, there's a possibility we can use the quantum realm to time travel, simply because I was in the quantum realm. I was stuck there for what in your time was 5 years. In my time, I only felt like I was there for 5 minutes. But here's the problem. That's not actually, our classic time travel from films. What that is called time dilation. So if some objects are traveling faster than other objects, time moves differently for those objects as they approach the speed of light. So if you're also near a gravitational field, time passes slower than it does if you're further away from a gravitational field. And time dilation is a real thing, and it's something that science actually has to account for when we put satellites into space. The further away from the Earth a satellite is, the difference in time passing. Time is going to pass slower for the object that's further away from the gravitational field. In fact, that was one of the plot points in the movie Interstellar, which they tried to explore, where the main character of the movie is able to age so slowly that his own daughter ages past him simply because he spent time in a black hole. Unfortunately, I think when it comes to science, a lot of these people don't seem to understand that the inside of a black hole is your death. Not only do you die, but you get erased. So it's not about time slowing down. It's about you being torn apart atom by atom. But they don't seem to understand that. You can go near the black hole and near the event horizon, which is where it begins. But by going into it, you actually destroy yourself. So ultimately, this idea about the quantum realm, I felt make no sense in this movie because, while Ant-Man could have been in there and he could have aged slower than everybody else based upon what he was saying. Oh yeah, he may be 5 years younger or something than everybody else, but that doesn't mean that he traveled through time. Traveling through time, as we see it in film, is that you take some type of machine or you use some type of event and you're able to move through time from one point to a time in the past. But that's not what Ant-Man did. Ant-Man was still moving forward in the future, but he was just moving forward slower than everybody else because he was in a place where time was slowed down to the point where it was 5 minutes equaling 5 years in our time. So I felt that just didn't make sense. And instead of playing it forward, they used this time travel trope. And I really think that actually kind of was stupid because it didn't make sense for a number of reasons. The whole idea is to use the Pym particles that Dr. Pym produced in order to go back in time and take the Infinity Stones from different points in time so that Thanos would not have had access to them. And when you take them from those points in time, bring them to the future in order to undo the Thanos snap, which, cost the universe half the life. Here's the problem with that, though. First of all, there's a belief or a theory, you could call it, in physics that's called the law of causality, which basically says that anything that happens has happened and can't be undone because it's already happened. They even allude to that in the film by mentioning Back to the Future 2, which was the first movie, I think, that talked about that in detail, where Dr. Brown needed Marty to go back into time in order to correct a timeline that had been skewed off into a hellish timeline, which wasn't what everybody from the original Hill Valley knew to be the reality or their reality. So apparently, going back into time and changing something doesn't destroy the future timeline, but what it does was it causes time to skew off into a different direction, and it creates multiple, I guess you could call it multiple universes, which that's easy to understand. And the reason why is because even in the first film, there was a part where Doctor Strange uses his gem in order to look at the multiple possible futures that there are and how many possible futures that the Avengers could end with a victory. So my problem is it doesn't make sense that they were going to go back in time and take the Infinity Stones simply because by doing that, it would have made it so that Thanos wouldn't have had access to them because they wouldn't have been where they're supposed to be. Not only would Thanos not have had access to them, but all of those films that I watched while I was on the plane, I was watching all the Marvel movies, and every single Marvel movie was ultimately about an Infinity Stone in some way or another. Ultron was after the Mind Stone, which was used to create Vision, for example. Red Skull was after the Tesseract, which was actually a housing box for the Space Stone. And the Space Stone was the one that allowed you to move from one point in space to any other point in space by opening up wormholes. And then you had the other Infinity Stones, like the Power Stone that you had in Guardians of the Galaxy and so forth and so on. So my point is, if you go back into time and you take those stones before Thanos gets them, it makes it so that Thanos can't get them. And if he can't get them, then he can't do something that he did. But that doesn't make sense. And that's the reason what was repeating on me, to the point where I was like, wait a minute, why did they play it like this? It just doesn't make sense that you'd go back in time to take something to keep, like, for instance, if I know that somebody gets shot and just got shot this morning, like, for instance, the kid there was a bastard in the news who shot up a Jewish synagogue, right? And one woman died. If I knew that he was going to do that and I had a time machine, let's say I go back in time a day before he did it and I take his AR-15 and I take his guns from him. If I go back in time and I take his guns from him, then unless he figures out a way to get another weapon, there's no way that he's going to be able to do what he did, especially what he did with the weapon that he did it. If I go and I take his AR-15 from him and he has no money to buy another AR-15, or he has no way to get another AR-15, then there's no way that he can use an AR-15 to shoot up this synagogue the next day. There's just no way it can happen. It can't happen. Here's the problem, though. If I were to do that and I take his gun away and he can't shoot up the synagogue, then that means that it never happened. And if it never happened, then that timeline is going to continue without that ever happening, or at least if he does it at a later time, it can happen at a later time. But for me, it had to have happened simply because I felt the need to go back into time to stop it. That's where you start creating paradoxes. Another aspect that I felt was poor writing was the way they alerted Thanos to the aspect of the Avengers going back into time in order to take the Infinity Stones and make it so he couldn't have access to them. The way they did that was ultimately when they sent Nebula of the future back into the past, the Nebula of the past, senses, I guess you could say, or it was like if you have two computers that come within contact with each other, their Bluetooths or their Wi-Fi senses the other, and then it says, hey, you want to connect to this other thing? Just push connect and enter a pairing code or whatever. So because Nebula's a cyborg or an android of some type, or I guess the proper term is gynoid because she's a female, Nebula's presence in the past causes the previous Nebula it caused her to sense that the Nebula of the future had come to the past, and that alerted Thanos to the fact that the Avengers were coming to the past in order to do what they were planning to do. I think that made no sense whatsoever. Now, granted, it is possible that that could have happened that way, but my problem was the way they played it. It just, to me, it just didn't make sense. Like, I could almost understand if, okay, let's say for whatever reason, both nebulas were connected to some kind of central terminal or something, and it like was recharging in the way that you see like 7 of 9 and Voyager gets into a Borg alcove in order to recharge her body or whatever. And when she does that, she joins the collective and all thought becomes one. I could understand if they had played it that way, but the way they played it was just so ridiculously convenient that to me it felt like lazy writing. Now, I mean, there are ways that they could have written it a little bit better, but the way that they did it, to me, it just felt a little rushed and it felt a little skewed. One of the things that many people in the audience might like is the way they handle the Hulk in this movie. Instead of the Hulk just being the beast, what they've done is they've fused Dr. Banner's intelligence with the Hulk's body in order to create what you might as well just call the Credible Hulk, where he's still the big green monster. It's just that now he's, acts like a regular person. He's, intelligent. He's easy to talk to. Now, the Hulk becomes like one of the key characters specifically because the Hulk, or I could say Dr. Banner, figures that, because the radiation emitted by the stones is so powerful that he may be the only living thing that can handle it. Okay, fine, I could buy that, but my problem was that in the original film, Thanos' snap is done without damaging Thanos' body. In fact, when Thanos does his snap, it seems to heal the damage that was done by Thor when Thor slammed his axe into Thanos' heart or chest. So we understand that a large amount of energy is being released by these stones, but my problem is in the first movie, they didn't indicate that that much energy would be enough to destroy or damage the person who used it. There was no mention of gamma radiation. There was no mention of, damage to the user. There was just no mention of that. So if that's the case, then why come up with this now if not to do anything other but to justify the killing of one of your main characters? And then I have to mention the Soul Stone. The Soul Stone is being kept by the Red Skull, who demands a sacrifice in order to have access to it. So basically, without trying to give away a spoiler, a sacrifice has to be made of one of the Avengers in this film in order to get the Soul Stone. Here's the thing, though. The Soul Stone already got a sacrifice in the first film, Infinity War, where Thanos pushes Gamora over the side of the mountain, and then he wakes up in a pool where he has the Soul Stone in his hand. Okay, fine. But if that's the case, in the end of the movie, the Soul Stone is returned to the place where it was taken. So if the Soul Stone is being returned to the place where it was taken, just like the other Infinity Stones are being returned to the place where they're taken by the end of the film, then wouldn't the two people who'd been sacrificed in order to gain the Soul Stone, wouldn't they come back to life, or wouldn't they have a reason to be reintegrated back into the world? Because the thing about it is, how many sacrifices have been made for that stone? And if the stone demands a trade, then trading it back should demand a refund. It's like when I go to the store and I buy something and I keep my receipt. When I take it back and I was like, yeah, I don't want this anymore, and I give them it back, they give me my money back, and I walk away after having given them everything back. I get my money back. It's a refund. So they basically already built into the film a reason why we should be able to get characters back, such as I can't even say it, Gamora, and the other person who ends up getting sacrificed. Now, I understand that with the Mind Stone, for instance, we're not going to get back Vision. But then again, if that stone gets returned as well, then shouldn't the future timeline include a Vision? Because Thanos ultimately had to rip it out of his head in order to get access to that stone. So if that was the case, then returning the stone to the original point in the past would allow for the later Ultron to be able to get that stone in order to prepare to use it in one of his robotic bodies. That's the problem with making these time travel movies. If you're going to make a time travel movie, you have to remember, it's like if you change anything in the flow, you're going to change it in the flow of a different timeline or the past. It just doesn't make sense. I think the greatest subversion of my expectations was how they treated Iron Man in the film. I really don't want to give away any spoilers, but then again, most people have probably already watched this film, and I'm going to just post at the beginning of this video that this video contains obvious spoilers. But here's the thing. In the movie, Iron Man basically moves on, and he has a family with Pepper and a daughter. So the way I expected the movie to play out was, I thought what was ultimately going to happen was he was going to be afraid to move on because he didn't want to give up his daughter, and he didn't want to give up his newfound life that he didn't have before, since he was being a superhero and he didn't have time for it. Or he was unable to do it because of the threat that would have been against his family in order to get to him. Now, I think it would have actually worked better dramatically if they had played it forward in that manner where, okay, great, we've got a chance to get Thanos, we got a chance to get the Gauntlet, we have a chance to stop him from doing, or we have a chance to reverse what he did. You wouldn't be able to stop what he did, but we have a chance to reverse what he did. But in doing so, that would change, the future timeline and whatnot, to the point where Tony might lose out on his daughter and he might lose out on his family. And I think it would have worked a lot better dramatically if they had forced the Avengers to wrestle with the aspect of turning around everything that had been done. Because you really think about it, if half of everybody was still alive, that half was ultimately going to do the same thing Tony did. They were going to move on with their lives. So for instance, let's say you were a wife and you lost your husband to the snap. Eventually you're going to find somebody new, you're going to move on. Or the same happens, like if you're a man, you lose your wife, you're going to find another wife, you're going to move on, right? So the problem is, if you do reverse the snap, you bring back everybody who was lost, then all of that would have like major consequences on the future, simply because now you're going to have suddenly a lot more people who were originally forgotten, who have gravestones out there, who have tombstones built in their memory. It's like all of a sudden all of them are coming back. And if they all come back, then now there's plenty more consequences. Like, for instance, the movie makes a point that Thanos was right, that by knocking off half of the life, that the air gets cleaner, the water gets cleaner, and all this, which is like a temporary benefit of, not having so much usage and everything. So now you undo that, and by undoing it, now you're bringing back all of the pollution, you're bringing back all of the crime, you're bringing back all of the problems that you just got rid of just a little while ago with the snap. So, I really thought that the movie would try to be intellectual and play it that way. It's like, oh, look at all this newfound peace and all this newfound beauty that we have in the world that's no longer overpopulated. Are we really going to undo that? And we're going to bring back all these problems. It's like, I really thought that they were going to wrestle with that aspect, like with Tony, that they were wrestling with the possibility of him losing his family. Now, I know he did say at one point, well, maybe it's possible that I can bring back everybody and keep what I've lost, and I can also keep what I've found. But that's not how the movie played it. The movie played it a totally different way, and I really, really feel that it was due to poor writing. I really think that they did not explore the consequences well enough of what would happen if you suddenly bring back so many people. I mean, you really think about it, what Thanos did wasn't undone. And it wasn't undone simply because everybody knew that it had been done in the first place. Had everything Thanos done been undone, there'd be no memory of what he had done. But here you've got a situation where all of these dead people are coming back to life to a world that's been without them for more than 5 years. That means your lawn hasn't been mowed. That means that your house might be falling apart. That means that your car is not working anymore. It's falling apart. It's like everything that you weren't there to take care of is basically going to be in disarray. 5 years worth of disarray. So, it was just little things like that. I understand, yeah, it's a comic book movie, and yeah, you're supposed to just take it at face value and everything. But it was like, I really felt that Infinity Wars was so much better structured, and I also felt that it had a totally more logical outcome than watching Endgame. As I said before, they didn't really, in the first movie, they in no way indicated that the Infinity Stones could harm the user in the way that they did. And that's why the ending, to me, didn't make sense. I enjoyed the movie, but I absolutely did not enjoy the movie as much as I enjoyed Infinity War. Infinity War, I felt, was just so much better. And, it was funny. I had a chance just recently to watch all of the Marvel movies over again. I watched the Avengers movies. I watched the Iron Man movies. And they were so well put together, despite the fact that they fall back on CGI battles in order to keep them moving. It was like they were just put together so well. And I really felt that Endgame should have been better. And I know a lot of people are going to go into the theater and they're automatically going to have very, very high expectations. And pretty much most of them are going to come out satisfied. But me personally, it's like if Infinity Wars gets an A, Endgame, in my opinion, gets a B. And I've noticed that online, like when you look at Rotten Tomatoes, you look at Wikipedia, I've noticed that a lot of the scores for a lot of these movies have been really skewed and padded, because what they do is they split the critics' reviews and the audience reviews. And I know this movie is going to end up getting really good reviews. I mean, most people are going to say, "Oh wow, look at all the people fighting at the same time, and look at all the effects and this, that, and the other." But when it came to plot elements, I would end up giving this movie a C out of an A through F scale. I mean, the effects were really good. Okay, the effects were great, but with these Marvel movies, it's like the plot and the effects is supposed to be intertwined to the point where it's like you're not just watching CGI for the sake of watching CGI. And I really felt, especially in the movie, that the points where the characters are just acting, that's one of the stronger parts of the Marvel films where, yeah, you've got all this great technology, you've got all this great CGI, but that's pushed to the background, and what you're really getting is you're getting some great interactions between characters. You're getting some really good writing. But in this film, I'm really sorry. I don't like the way they handled Thanos. I don't like the way they handled the time travel plot. And I really don't like the way they handled the endings of some of the characters. I think that it just wasn't done properly. So that's my rant. And I had to just talk about that.